Welcome to Shadows of History. Join us as we delve into real, dark crimes and baffling mysteries that time couldn't bury. Prepare for chilling tales and unsolved enigmas. Today's episode unravels the baffling tale of Strasbourg's dancing plague, a 16th century mystery where dozens danced for days without rest. Was it hysteria, poison, or something darker? Let's step into history's strangest rhythm.
Welcome to the deep dive. You know, history isn't always straightforward, is it? Sometimes you look back and find these shadows, things that just don't quite add up.
Absolutely. And today, we're definitely stepping into one of those shadows, a really deep one.
We are. We're talking about something utterly bizarre. The dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg. It sounds like fiction, honestly.
It really does, but we actually have quite a bit to go on. You shared those sources chronicles from people who were there, physician notes, modern research too.
Right. So we have the details, but what happened? But the why? That's the mystery.
Exactly. So our mission today, I guess, is to unpack what these sources tell us. How did this whole thing unfold? How did the city handle it?
And then get into the big theories people have come up with over the years. Because, spoiler alert, nobody really knows for sure what caused it.
Still a genuine historical puzzle. So let's dive in. Strasbourg, July 1518. Part of the Holy Roman Empire back then. Busy city.
And probably pretty stressed, right? Lots going on.
Definitely. And the sources say it starts with one person, a woman named Frau Troffea.
What does she do? Just start dancing?
Pretty much. Just walked out into the street near her home and began to dance.
But not like happy dancing.
No, not at all. The accounts really emphasize it was involuntary. Like she couldn't stop. Her husband tried, neighbors tried, nothing worked. She was just compelled, you know?
Wow. Just kept going.
For hours. Some reports say for days with hardly any rest. It sounds less like dancing and more like a kind of physical mania. Constant, exhausting movement.
That's terrifying. And then it spread.
Uh-huh. And fast. The chronicles say within about a week, maybe 30 other people were doing the same thing, just started dancing uncontrollably.
30? Just like that?
Yeah, joining Frau Troffea. And it didn't stop there. It escalated.
How many people are we talking about eventually?
The estimates in the sources climb pretty high. Some say up to 400 people were caught up in it over the next few weeks.
400 people dancing uncontrollably. Can you even imagine that scene? Just chaos.
Utter chaos. Scattered across the city. Moving and moving until they basically dropped.
And the sources talk about the consequences, right? This wasn't harmless.
Not at all. It was physically devastating. People collapsed from exhaustion, obviously. But there are injuries too. Sprains, broken bones from falling.
And worse.
Yeah, the sources are pretty clear, tragically. Some people literally danced themselves to death. Heart attacks, strokes, just sheer exhaustion.
Oh my God. People died from this.
Yes. The numbers aren't perfectly agreed upon, but it was enough that the city chronicles recorded fatalities. This was a real crisis.
So the city officials, the council, they must have been panicking. What do they do?
Well, they definitely took it seriously. The records show that. It wasn't just seen as like bad behavior. They knew something profound was happening.
Did they bring in doctors?
They did, consulted the physicians of the day. And this is interesting. The physicians apparently ruled out supernatural causes. You know, demons, curses, that kind of thing.
Okay, so not demons. That's progressive for the time, maybe.
Sort of. It suggests they were looking for a physical cause, something happening in the body.
So what did they think it was? And what did they do?
Right. Well, this is where the response gets really peculiar from our modern viewpoint.
How so?
Instead of trying to stop the dancing, the doctors and the council decided the best thing to do was encourage more dancing.
Wait, what? More dancing? Why?
It sounds completely backwards, doesn't it? But the theory, best we can tell from their actions, was maybe something about hot blood or a fever that needed to be worked out of the system through movement, like sweating out a fever, but dancing it out.
Dance the plague away.
Seriously, that seems to have been the idea. So they took some pretty wild steps. They cleared public areas. They actually built wooden stages in places like guild halls and market squares.
Stages? For the dancers?
Yeah. And get this, they hired musicians, drummers, pipers, to provide music for the people who were dancing uncontrollably.
They hired a band for the plague victims. I'm speechless.
The idea was, okay, give them a space, give them a beat, maybe they can dance this thing out faster, exhaust the illness.
Did it work? Please tell me it didn't make things worse.
Well, looking back, scholars think it probably did make things worse. Bringing everyone together, making a public spectacle, adding music.
Yeah.
It might have just intensified the whole thing, maybe even encouraged it to spread psychologically.
Yeah, that makes more sense. A kind of feedback loop.
Exactly. It certainly didn't seem to cure anyone.
Who actually wrote all this down? How do we know these details?
Good question. A lot comes from people like Paracelsus, the physician. He wrote about it, though his ideas were sometimes a bit out there.
Okay.
But more importantly, we have the local Strasbourg chronicles. These are like the official city records.
Yeah.
They noted the events, the deaths, what the council decided. That gives it real weight. It wasn't just rumor.
So the event itself is pretty well documented. The what is clear. Hundreds dancing, some dying,
Yeah.
the city building stages.
Right. But the why, that's still the massive question mark hanging over it all these centuries later.
Okay, let's get into that. The theories. What's the leading contender? I know you mentioned modern scholars lean a certain way.
Yeah, a lot of modern thinking points towards something called mass psychogenic illness, basically mass hysteria.
Mass hysteria, like a psychological contagion.
Kind of. You have to remember the context. Strasbourg in 1518 was under immense pressure. We're talking disease outbreaks, serious famine, poverty, social unrest. People were stressed to the max.
And the Reformation was kicking off too, right? Religious turmoil.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Martin Luther had just posted his 95 Theses the year before, so there's this huge spiritual anxiety, uncertainty everywhere.
So the idea is all that stress just boiled over.
Hmm.
And the dancing was how it came out.
That's the argument. This extreme stress, physical, social, religious, created fertile ground for some kind of collective psychological break. The dancing could be a physical manifestation of that anxiety, spreading through suggestion in a tense, crowded city.
It makes a certain kind of sense, connecting mind and body under pressure. But does it explain everything?
Well, that's where the critiques come in, based on the sources. Why dancing specifically? Mass hysteria can show up in lots of ways. Why this incredibly specific, physically demanding symptom across so many people?
Right. And was everyone affected or just certain people?
It seems to have been a specific group, even if it grew large. It wasn't like the whole city suddenly felt vaguely ill and then started dancing. It was more focused. That doesn't perfectly fit the typical pattern of mass psychogenic illness triggered by general stress alone.
Okay, so if not just mass hysteria, what else? You mentioned a physical cause earlier.
Right. Theory number 2, toxins, specifically ergot fungus.
Ergot, what's that?
It's a mold, Claviceps purpurea. Grows on rye and other grains, especially if it's been damp, which fits with potential harvest issues and famine conditions the sources mention.
And this mold is dangerous.
Oh, yeah. It produces powerful alkaloids, nasty stuff. Historically, eating contaminated grain caused outbreaks of ergotism, sometimes called St. Anthony's fire.
St. Anthony's fire, what did that do?
Well, there were 2 main types. One, affected blood flow, could lead to gangrene, that's the fire part, a burning sensation. But the other type is convulsive ergotism.
Convulsive, okay, I see where this is going.
Exactly. Symptoms include muscle spasms, seizures, vomiting, hallucinations, delirium. The key things are the convulsions and spasms.
So the theory is they ate bad bread made from moldy rye, and the ergot poisoning made them twitch and convulse, looking like dancing.
That's the gist. The alkaloids mess with your nervous system, could trigger these uncontrollable movements, and maybe a delirious state. It gives a biological explanation.
That sounds plausible too, a physical trigger. But does that fit all the details?
Again, there are some issues when you look closely at the accounts. The sources don't just describe random twitching or seizures. They consistently use the word dancing. They talk about relentless, almost rhythmic movement, even if it was frantic.
Not just chaotic spasms.
Right. Ergot convulsions are usually more disordered, intermittent, and you'd maybe expect other ergotism symptoms to be more prominent in the descriptions for everyone affected, like the gangrene, or really obvious hallucinations being the main feature, rather than the movement itself.
Okay, so maybe not ergot either, or not just ergot. What's left?
Well, the third angle looks at it more culturally or socially. Was this some kind of mass ritual? Or maybe even a protest?
A protest? How would dancing be a protest?
Think about the context again, all that tension, religious and social. Maybe this wasn't entirely involuntary for everyone. Perhaps it started that way. Or perhaps it was a way for people under extreme pressure to express something collectively.
Like what? Religious ecstasy.
Could be an extreme religious experience in a time of spiritual crisis. Or maybe it was a protest, a way to disrupt normal life, challenge authority, express despair or defiance through this very public physical act.
Any evidence for that? Like, did they have signs or belong to a specific group?
That's the tricky part. Some have speculated about secret societies or cults using dance, but there's no solid proof in the main sources connecting these dancers to a specific group or stated protest aim.
And the involuntary part is still hard to square with an organized ritual or protest, isn't it? The sources really stress that people couldn't stop.
Exactly. While the social context is crucial, this theory struggles with that core description of compulsion. It remains more interpretive.
So we've got mass hysteria, ergot poisoning, ritual or protest. And none of them quite fit perfectly.
Pretty much. Each one explains some aspects, but runs into trouble with others based on the contemporary accounts. The truth might be a combination or something else entirely we haven't figured out.
It really is still locked away in history's shadows then. An event we know happened, we have records of it, the city reacted, but the why is just gone.
And that's why it's so fascinating, isn't it? It sticks with you. It's inspired art, writing, music, further scientific study into things like mass psychogenic illness because it's such an extreme example of something.
Something bizarre happening to a whole community.
Right. So after digging into all this, looking at the sources, the theories, the dead ends, what does it leave us thinking about?
For me, it comes back to that pressure cooker environment. Famine, disease, fear, massive social change.
And in the middle of that, hundreds of people are seized by this physical urge to dance themselves, literally, to exhaustion or death. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much do we really grasp about how our minds, our bodies, and our environment interact, especially under extreme stress?
Yeah. It's a humbling reminder that there are still deep mysteries about the human condition itself.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the very strange, very real dancing plague of 1518. We hope walking through the history and the theories has been interesting, maybe even a little unsettling for you.
It's certainly one of those historical events that raises more questions than answers, but exploring those questions is valuable in itself.
We hope you'll come back for more explorations here on the deep dive.
And if you found this journey into history's shadows worthwhile, maybe consider liking and subscribing. It really does help us keep digging.
See you next time.
There's always more hidden between the lines of history. Until next time, stay curious.